The world believes Dean Martin passed away on December 25, 1995. Medical records point to respiratory failure in his Beverly Hills residence, where he drew his final breath, surrounded by nothing but expensive furniture and memories. The press wrote elegant tributes about his film career, his crooning voice, and that trademark relaxed demeanor that made him America's favorite playboy. They mentioned lung disease and the wear of 8 decades, but those who truly knew him understood a different reality. The man lowered into the ground in 1995 was merely breathing. The actual Dean Martin, the one with fire in his belly and laughter in his throat, had vanished years before. His spirit departed on a frozen California mountainside. The calendar read March 21, 1987, when a single phone call brought the entertainer crashing to his knees and extracted every ounce of life force from his body. That afternoon, the master of effortless charm didn't suffer the loss of celebrity status. His bank accounts remained untouched. His vocal cords still functioned. What shattered was something far more precious: his boy, his firstborn son, his reason for waking up each morning. When that connection severed, so did his will to continue the performance. What follows is the devastating truth about the moment all music ceased, the story of a parent's soundless agony that lingered for 8 agonizing years before he could finally join his son in eternal rest. Before we can grasp the enormity of what destroyed Dean Martin, we need to explore the relationship he maintained with his boy, Dean Paul Martin, affectionately called Dino Jr. by everyone who mattered. Within the sprawling Martin dynasty, this young man burned brightest. He embodied his father's qualities while surpassing them in ways that made Dean burst with pride. The kid had inherited that magnetic presence, that natural ability to command attention without demanding it. Dino Jr. was California gold personified. He dominated tennis courts with the skill to compete at Wimbledon. Hollywood came calling, offering him roles in productions like Players and television series such as Misfits of Science. Music ran through his veins, too, performing with his rock group Dino, Desi, and Billy. Yet above all these accomplishments, one passion defined him: aviation. And he wasn't some weekend hobbyist buzzing around in a Cessna. Captain Dean Paul Martin flew F-4 Phantom Pants for the California Air National Guard, commanding one of the most sophisticated war machines ever built. For Dean, who constructed an entire persona around playing the lovable drunk while secretly being a devoted family man who drank apple juice on stage, his son represented vindication. Dino Jr. proved that beneath the showbiz facade, Dean had succeeded at what truly mattered. Their bond transcended typical father-son dynamics. These were confidants, golf partners, men who could communicate entire conversations through a glance and a grin. Dean Martin famously maintained emotional distance from nearly everyone, constructing psychological barriers that even his closest collaborators couldn't penetrate. But for Dino Jr., those walls crumbled. The boy saw past the Italian crooner act, past the trademark tuxedo and half-closed eyes, directly into his father's authentic self. When Dean observed his son, he witnessed his own legacy taking flight. Not the manufactured legacy of record sales and movie contracts, but something genuine. Something earned through courage and discipline rather than charm and timing. Dino Jr. served as Dean's anchor to reality. When Hollywood's superficiality became suffocating, when Frank Sinatra's demands grew exhausting, when the endless performances felt hollow, Dean would think of his son strapped into a fighter jet, serving his nation, and feel a pride that no standing ovation could manufacture. He introduced him as the captain to everyone. He kept photographs of Dino Jr. in his flight gear prominently displayed. "My kid flies supersonic jets," he'd say with genuine humility. "I just stand on stages and sing. Who's really impressive here?" Behind the self-deprecating humor lay absolute truth. Dean worshipped his son. This profound, unspoken understanding between them is precisely why March 1987 didn't simply break Dean Martin. It executed him spiritually while leaving his body functioning. Saturday, March 21, 1987 dawned like countless Los Angeles mornings before it. But 60 miles away in the San Bernardino Mountains, conditions were deteriorating rapidly. Mount San Gorgonio, Southern California's highest peak, was being consumed by an unseasonable blizzard. Visibility had vanished. Winds screamed between granite walls. Snow fell so thick it erased the boundary between earth and sky. Captain Dean Paul Martin and his weapons systems operator, Captain Ramon Ortiz, had a routine training flight scheduled. Their aircraft, an F-4C Phantom, was pure power and speed, capable of shattering sound barriers. But that afternoon, nature held all the cards. They launched from March Air Force Base early afternoon. The mission plan was straightforward: climb through cloud layers following standard departure procedures, then head toward desert airspace. Dean Martin sat in his Beverly Hills home completely unaware. Perhaps he was watching a golf tournament or one of those Western films he loved. Maybe he was reading the newspaper, sipping something non-alcoholic, utterly oblivious that 60 miles away, his entire universe was about to implode. At 1:52 in the afternoon, Dino Jr. The jet requested permission for a left turn from air traffic control. The clouds ahead looked menacing, impenetrable walls of gray blocking their route. The controller granted the turn, but somewhere in those final seconds, inside that disorienting whiteout where pilots lose all reference points and the world becomes a featureless void, catastrophe struck. The Phantom, screaming through the air at over 400 miles per hour, didn't bank away from the mountain. It turned directly toward it. San Gorgonio shows no mercy. Its granite faces rise 11,000 feet, sheer and unforgiving. In that blinding snowstorm, Dino Jr. wouldn't have detected the mountain until impact was inevitable. No time for fear, no opportunity to react. They were flying. Then they weren't. The jet collided with the mountain's granite wall at full velocity. The explosion would have been massive, but muffled instantly by heavy snow. A fireball swallowed by the blizzard. Back in Beverly Hills, the telephone remained silent. Sunlight might have been warming Dean's patio. He existed in perfect ignorance. He couldn't sense the disturbance in the universe. He didn't know his golden boy had just been erased from existence. But silence was approaching. The radar signature had disappeared from screens at March Air Force Base. Controllers attempted contact. Phantom 6, respond. Phantom 6, do you copy? Nothing but static, and within that static lived a nightmare that would consume Dean Martin until his own death. The notification didn't arrive immediately. Initially, it was just concern, a delayed return, a missing aircraft. But when the telephone finally shattered the peace in Dean's house, the voice belonged to an Air National Guard official. "Mr. Martin, your son's aircraft is missing." Those words contain more terror than any parent should endure. Missing. The word suggests possibility while carrying the weight of doom. For the next 72 hours, Dean Martin descended into a personal inferno that defies description. The mountain storm was so vicious that search crews couldn't approach the crash site. Helicopters remained grounded. Ground teams were repelled by avalanche danger and zero visibility. Dean sat motionless in his living room. He abandoned sleep. Food held no appeal. He consumed cigarettes without pause, creating a permanent blue fog around himself that reflected his internal state. He stared at the telephone as if concentration alone could force it to deliver good news. His mind created scenarios. Perhaps Dino Jr. had ejected safely. Perhaps he was sitting on the mountainside, wrapped in his parachute, cold but breathing, waiting for rescue. Dean clung these delusions with the desperation of someone drowning. Friends appeared at his door. Frank Sinatra came. Sammy Davis Jr. stopped by. Jerry Lewis called repeatedly. Dean barely acknowledged them. He existed in a trance of suffering. The king of cool had vanished, replaced by a terrified father trembling in sleepwear. He wore paths in his expensive carpets, pacing endlessly, mumbling prayers he hadn't spoken since childhood in Steubenville, Ohio. "Please, God, take it all. Take every dollar. Take the fame. Just return my boy. Just let him live." But God wasn't negotiating that week. The storm continued its assault, burying the mountain in white, concealing the wreckage and the truth. Every minute without information was another cut. The uncertainty was a blade slicing through Dean's sanity. He would pour whiskey, stare at the glass, then set it aside untouched, feeling guilty for even considering comfort while his son might be freezing to death. On the third day, weather conditions improved enough for search helicopters to launch. They located the scar on the granite face. They found the debris field, no parachute, no survivors. When confirmation arrived that Dino Jr. had died on impact, Dean didn't rage. He didn't destroy furniture. He simply collapsed internally. Like a marionette whose strings had been severed, he crumpled. That mischievous spark in his eyes, that trademark twinkle that had seduced the world for 4 decades, extinguished permanently. He placed the phone down gently and sank into his chair, staring at a blank television screen. The silence filling that room was thunderous. It was the sound of irreparable destruction. The funeral became a blur of black vehicles, weeping celebrities, and military protocol, a folded American flag, the mournful cry of taps from a lone bugler. Dean Martin attended physically, but his soul was elsewhere. He moved mechanically. He wore those dark sunglasses, not for style, but to conceal eyes swollen and lifeless. People offered condolences. They said Dino Jr. died heroically. They insisted he hadn't suffered. Dean nodded automatically, but he couldn't hear them. The only sound reaching him was the silence where his son's laughter used to live. At the graveside, Dean appeared decades older than his actual age. The vitality that had defined him had evaporated, replaced by gray, fragile emptiness. He touched the casket slowly, tenderly, as if tucking Dino Jr. into bed one final time. Witnesses reported he whispered something, but nobody could determine the words. Perhaps I love you, perhaps wait for me, perhaps I'm sorry. Following the funeral, Dean Martin retreated to his Mountain Drive estate and locked the gates. He stopped accepting calls. He stopped going to restaurants. The world wanted Dean Martin back on stage, but Dean Martin wanted nothing from the world. He felt betrayed by existence itself. He had followed the rules. He had worked relentlessly, provided for his family, entertained millions of people. This was his reward. Burying his child? It was senseless, a cosmic joke. And for the first time in his life, Dean didn't find the joke amusing. He began shedding his celebrity trappings. The gold records meant nothing. The television ratings were irrelevant. He sat alone watching Western films on endless repeat. Why Westerns? Because in Westerns, heroes prevailed. In Westerns, death served a purpose. In Westerns, the world made sense. The complex, agonizing reality of 1987 was unbearable. He became a phantom in his own home, drifting between rooms, carrying the crushing, invisible weight of grief that pressed down like the granite of San Gorgonio itself. A year later, in 1988, Frank Sinatra and Sammy Davis Jr. attempted an intervention. They watched their friend fading, literally dying from a broken heart, and they devised a plan, a massive reunion tour, together again. The Rat Pack back under spotlights, filling arenas, recapturing the magic. Frank believed applause would heal Dean. He thought music would resurrect him. Frank was tragically mistaken. Frank didn't understand that Dean didn't want resurrection. He wanted to be left in peace, but Dean, ever loyal, agreed. He couldn't disappoint Frank and Sammy. The tour launched and immediately became a disaster for Dean. He stood on stages in Oakland, Vancouver, and Chicago looking utterly lost. He forgot lyrics. He flicked cigarette ash onto the stage with visible contempt. The old magic, the impeccable timing, the spark had vanished. He looked at audiences and saw thousands of strangers demanding he be entertaining, demanding he be Dino, while his heart bled internally. He felt like a clown performing at a wake. In Chicago, it reached a breaking point. Dean turned to Frank mid-performance and mumbled, "I need to go home." Frank tried encouraging him. "Come on, Dino, let's kill them." But Dean had nothing left to offer. He dropped his cigarette, walked off stage, and headed straight to the airport. He flew back to Los Angeles, abandoning the tour, abandoning the money, abandoning the legend. He checked into a hospital citing kidney issues, but everyone knew the truth. It was a soul issue. He was finished. He had attempted being Dean Martin one final time for his friends, but the mask wouldn't adhere anymore. It fell away, revealing the grieving father underneath. That Chicago night was the final time the authentic Rat Pack ever existed. Dean had walked away not from arrogance, but from complete exhaustion. He had realized that no amount of applause could fill the void in his chest. The final 7 years of Dean Martin's life were a masterclass in solitude. He didn't become a bizarre recluse. He simply became a man finished with noise. He established a quiet routine. Every evening he would dress in his tuxedo or sports coat, always maintaining appearance out of habit and self-respect, and visit his favorite Italian restaurants, La Familia or Da Vinci. He occupied the same table. The staff understood not to interrupt him. They brought his pasta fagioli, his bread, his wine, and frequently Dean requested they set a place for the empty chair across from him. Some speculated he was expecting Frank. Others whispered about a mysterious woman. But those who truly knew understood that empty chair belonged to Dino Jr. He was dining with his son. He would sit for hours, eating slowly, sipping wine, staring into middle distance, lost in conversations only he could hear. Fans occasionally approached for autographs. Dean always obliged politely. He would sign the napkin, flash that sleepy smile, and say, "My pleasure, pal." But the eyes remained vacant. They were the eyes of someone just waiting for the check so he could leave. His days consisted of watching television, playing golf until weakness prevented it, and sleeping. He wasn't dramatically sad anymore. He was simply absent. He was serving time, a prisoner of existence awaiting release. He missed his friends. Sammy's death in 1990 was another blow, but mostly he missed the boy on the mountain. He told a friend once, "Death doesn't frighten me. Why would it? Everyone I love is already there." It was a profound statement of both faith and exhaustion. The king of cool had become a monk of sorrow, finding strange comfort in isolation. Then the end finally arrived, Christmas Day, 1995. A poetic date for someone who had made Marshmallow World and Baby It's Cold Outside holiday classics. Dean Martin lay in bed. His breathing was labored and shallow. The emphysema from decades of cigarettes had destroyed his lungs, but it was grief that had destroyed his will to breathe. He was 78 years old. As the world outside celebrated, unwrapping presents and singing carols, Dean Martin closed his eyes. There was no struggle, no panic, just a gentle exhale, a final release of the burden he had carried for 8 years. The silence he had sought so desperately finally embraced him completely. When news broke, the Las Vegas Strip dimmed its lights in tribute. The world mourned an icon. Frank Sinatra, devastated and frail, wept for his brother. But for those who genuinely loved Dean, there was almost relief. They knew his suffering had ended. They knew that somewhere in the great beyond, the pilot had landed and the father was waiting at the gate. The tragic irony of Dean Martin's life is that he spent 40 years making us laugh, but his story concluded in tears. Yet within that tragedy lives a beautiful truth. It reminds us that fame is worthless, money is temporary, and awards are just metal. The only thing that truly matters, the only force powerful enough to break someone like Dean Martin, is love. He loved his son so completely that he couldn't survive without him, and that in its own heartbreaking way is the most noble legacy imaginable. So the next time you hear "That's Amore," don't just hear the jokes and Italian charm. Listen to the voice. Listen to the warmth and remember the man who died of a broken heart on a snowy mountain and the father who spent his final years staring at an empty chair, waiting for his boy to come home. Rest in peace, Dino. You finally got your wings.